Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy Top 5. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brigachley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
And before we get started tonight, just wanted to mention, check out our website, appalachianliturgy.com. Check out us on social media. Check out our YouTube. Please subscribe and give this video a like. Share it with others. And all that. So there's the housekeeping for tonight. Okay, to our top 5. Appalachian Liturgy Top 5 Debate. All right, so for top 5 tonight, we've already spoiled it from last week. We are doing fan questions.
Ruined.
It's ruined. Fan questions. Top 5 fan questions. It's probably more accurately top 5-ish fan questions. Because if we have more time, we are going to go through more than 5.
So honorable mentions. We'll promise 5, but not do.
That's right. That's right. Everything else is honorable mentions. So you can get mad at us that we chose some questions over others, I guess. But all right, so let's get started. There were some really interesting questions that popped up.
There were some not interesting questions too.
There were some not interesting questions. I will mention one at the very end.
Okay.
But
you got to hang around to hear it. Huh?
Yeah, at the very end. It's a not great question.
I will say I've had fun thinking about people's questions. I mean, I wish they would send more stuff in. Like,
right.
There are so many good questions. I mean, there's no way that there's some of the that we could talk about all of these in one sitting. Right. And
yeah, I mean, honestly, periodically we should probably reach out to, the said fans and see if they have any more questions, because this is what we need. This is going to spawn topics for our podcast.
Well,
outside of this.
I mean, when I'm listening or watching a podcast, I always have questions. Sometimes they're ridiculous. Like, I remember one time when we were with Christian Taylor, my question to her was going to be what shirt she had on, because her shirt was so cool. Like I wanted to know where she got it, or what was that in the background, or
Yeah, I can answer that. I can answer the shirt question. That was her movie shirt.
Her movie, her documentary. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I'm always like, people will mention things and I'll be like, oh, did they say they had a dog? Like, I mean, it doesn't have to be all serious stuff.
Right.
But
all right.
Send us questions.
So let's get started. How about Bowling? Do you want to choose our first question for the night?
Sure. So my favorite one is the belief in aliens compatible with Christianity? And I have a lot of thoughts on this one. This is a topic I've actually thought about quite a bit, but I'll let you all kind of bounce it first if you want, before I just kind of talk for an hour.
I mean, obviously, I would say yes. I haven't thought that much about it, to be honest. And I do kind of believe in aliens. I think that it's reasonable to believe that there is an intelligent species that's not us, that, it's somewhere out in space. So I don't have any issues believing in aliens, and I think it's compatible with my faith. So,
yeah, I mean, doing youth ministry, this came up a lot. This was a question, and were dinosaurs on the ark was another question that came up all the time. But anyway, or this is a little bit off topic, but I've actually had people ask me if it's anti-Christian to believe that there were dinosaurs. That, but we can talk about that another time. But as far as aliens, I don't know that it's a deep theological stance, but it seems like an awful big waste if God created this enormous universe to there not be other intelligent life out there. I do think that in Genesis, it tells us that we are made in God's image, which kind of infers that maybe there's something else out there, in my opinion. I don't know. So y'all can email me at brooke@grayumc.org to tell me how ridiculous that is.
You are. Yeah.
So Bowling, but I'm interested to hear what because you said you've thought about this a lot.
So I find this a very interesting topic. So I definitely believe that it's definitely compatible with Christianity. I would even go a little bit farther and say, it's possible that aliens might be able to become Christians, because this is something, if you look at it in a historical context, it's not that different from when you think about when the old world discovered the new world. because to them they found this group of people, and like there's no way these people were descended from Adam, and there was theological debates in the 1500s about whether or not these Native Americans had souls or something, and eventually Christianity came to the conclusion that yeah, they did, even though they didn't understand how these people might be descended from Adam or been created. And so like that was a problem we already had to wrestle with, I'd say. And there was a guy that came to St. Anne's about 2 or 3 years ago. His name's Brother Guy Consumalgo. He was the head of the Vatican Observatory, and he wrote a book called "Would You Baptize an Alien?" And he winds up talking a lot about that, and that's his same type of arguments for it. And I think there's been similar writings like that. And actually, speaking of books,
Oh, we even have a book. It's show and tell.
should have prepared better. I actually have a book here too. It's called Eifelheim, and it's a story set in the Middle Ages in Middle Age Germany. And it's like people are discovering it in the modern age, and they find out that there was this group of aliens that visited Germany in the Middle Ages. And it talks about like it's a Christian priest that winds up finding the aliens, and he has a hard time on like how he's supposed to interact with them. He like winds up writing to his bishop and like arguing about the theological significance of that. So yeah, I think it's a very fun topic, and I think it has a lot of correlation to like I said, the new world being discovered, and also the fact about like in the New Testament it talks about the cosmos are like going to be renewed. It's like all of creation was redeemed by Christ, and so I think there's that possibility as well. So yeah, I definitely think it's compatible, and I think it's so compatible that the aliens could even be Christian.
So all I could think about while you were talking is like when we find out that there are aliens and they're in orbit or whatever, and everybody in the world's wanting to like preemptively strike, and Bowling is going to be the one running around saying, "Don't wait."
I have pamphlets printed and ready to deliver to the aliens.
Yes, these are our Christian brethren. Yeah, I would be curious. I guess I have thought a bit about like if when we meet aliens, will they have some kind of knowledge of a god? Like, what will be their knowledge, or is it nothing? Like, are they more? I mean, because in my personal opinion,
wrote about it too. Sorry, I forgot about that one. He has a whole space trilogy about meeting aliens.
So, I mean,
wow, I haven't read that.
Any intelligent life form wrestles with creation. How did we get here? Or I would think they would. I mean, that cannot be if they're aliens. And this is so weird that we're having this conversation, but assuming they're aliens, I would think they would be having the same, where did they come from? What is their purpose? What happens when I mean, that's just like higher level thinking of.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I interrupted Justin. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But what you were saying is what put it off in my mind is because the aliens in his trilogy have not fallen. They never had a fall. And so like the theological implications of that are really fun to work through in those.
So they weren't under sin, basically.
Yeah. But
that's
sinful people came and took care of evangelations.
That's interesting.
It is. It's a fun book. There's a lot of writings out there about it. And I don't think there's really anything fundamentally incompatible. Yeah.
Well, it seems like you're just going to plug books all night tonight.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Maybe we need to make a list of books
that's right.
That Bowling
Best Space tonight. Christianity books.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So I guess the answer is we all believe yes.
So whatever reader or listener suggested that topic, great question.
That was a great question. All right, moving on. Let's see. I guess I will choose the next one. So the one I chose, and I guess it's because my dog's been on my mind the past couple of days. I had to take him to the vet yesterday, and he's had a cough, like a hack, over the past month, and was getting a little concerned. He also needed his shots, so it was a good time to get that checked out. And they test him for heartworms. Come back today, negative. So he does not have heartworms. They said that it's probably just because he's overweight, like he's gained 5 pounds since the last time he went to the vet, and that in small dogs, when they get overweight, their trachea starts kind of closing in their neck. So that's probably why he hacks all the time. So it's like solution, help him lose weight. So that's that's why this question was on my mind. But somebody submitted, "Do all dogs go to heaven?" And that's
Have you
definitely
not seen the
something.
movie?
Yeah, I mean that's a
This was
theological
answered
movie.
by
Right?
Hollywood.
No, right?
Disney answers this, but yeah. So do all dogs go to heaven? It's something that Renee and I have definitely talked about many times, specifically like animals in general. Do
Mhm.
they go to heaven? I think I've changed my view on this because before I probably would have said no, just because I always felt that animals don't really have that soul. So there would be nothing to go to heaven for, they're just physical beings. But I believe I've changed because, in my opinion, they bring us such joy that they're, even if it's not the same version or the same animal per se, there would have to be animals in a heaven, in a paradise. And here, I guess we are talking about the heaven afterlife. We're not really talking about like the eternal kingdom at the end of time. We're talking about heaven afterlife, and I would think that there would have to be, and in some form or fashion, just because it makes us happy and it brings us love, and so yes, I think that in some form or fashion they are in heaven, and it's there for our enjoyment, our love, and their love to give to us. It's just a way for God to express love is through animals. Yeah, thoughts.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I think this is a question that, people wrestle with all the time. And in the last 25 years of ministry or so, early on in those 25 years, this was never a conversation anybody would have had. And then, over the last 20 some years, you've seen things like pet crematoriums and pet cemetery, not the scary pet cemeteries, but, like real cemeteries. And so this question, I mean, we've actually been asked to preside over funerals for animals. And, but it's funny because John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, which became the Methodist Church, preached 1,000 sermons. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but so all of his sermons are written down. You can read them and they're numbered. So like number such and such, but sermon number 60 it's called the General Deliverance. It's based on Romans 8. And he makes a very strong argument that animals are always included in heaven because they can't sin, but that they suffer the effects of sin. And so that God redeems them in that manner. I mean, it's a lot more in depth than that, but yeah, it's a huge sermon that he says. So I've used it lots of times when people are talking about their animals. I'm like, yeah, like, so.
Awesome. Didn't the Pope release some kind of statement a couple years ago on this, Bowling?
I think it was like a little girl came up to him and asked if her dog was in heaven or something like that, because it's Aquinas did not believe that animals went to heaven. He more so believed that, there would be animals in heaven, but they're not going to be like, they don't have eternal souls. So that kind of what you were saying at first. And his response was something to the effect of, if it's impossible for us to be happy without animals in heaven, obviously God would have them there. And I kind of fall on the side of, well, that makes sense, and I'm open to that possibility, but I lean more towards there will be animals there, in some form or fashion, like you were saying. I don't know if I believe that, an animal has eternal life the same way that humans do, but I'm definitely open to that possibility. I'm not like going to advocate against it. I'm just
Which brings me to another topic, a related topic, which is the animal spirits. So obviously a lot of people believe in animal spirits. And actually my neighbor here recently, one of his cats got killed in the road, and it was one of his favorite cats, and he has a lot of cats, but it was like the one that he was the closest to, and it got killed in the road. And he swears to me that cat is still around at his house. that
I
he
have
can.
heard that, especially with cats. I've heard so many people say, I
Yeah,
just feel like that cat's still around. And
yeah.
um,
His daughter even says, because his daughter stays with him some, and she says that yes, that there is something in that house that is opening doors like the cat used to do, just crack it open, and that they can feel something jump on them, as if it's a cat or something, but there's nothing there. So they both swear that it's that cat spirit, and I'm open to that possibility. Like I don't want to shut down any kind of possibility of that. I just think it's interesting that an animal like that could have an eternal soul or a spirit that doesn't die when they die, and something happens to
well,
them.
yeah, I mean, I think you could make the argument that our pets love us, right? Like as a pet could. They obviously care for us, they show affection to us. Now, people could Aaron would argue that they show us affection just to get what they want, right? Like they want to be petted because it feels good, or they want to be fed, or they whatever, but that animal shows affection. And if animals show love and God is love, then they have to
Yeah.
have some kind of connection there. I think you could make that argument. John Wesley furthered his argument and said that his belief was that as Christians, we had a moral obligation to care for animals.
Sure.
And I mean, he goes into detail about if you have a pet, how you should treat them. And, I mean, it was, of course, John Wesley wrote prolifically about, he thought that he was the expert on everything, but
yeah, you think of St. Francis and his connection to animals.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Well, I
prominent.
mean, in the Methodist Church and Bowling, I'm assuming in the Catholic Church too, there's a blessing of the animals service.
We've had
so
iguanas and everything you can think of at the church.
Yeah.
Feast of St. Francis.
So I mean,
it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah,
I don't see any reason
I think it's
why
one of those
there
that
wouldn't
we
be
probably
animals.
don't have any direct revelation, and so like the theological musings of people it's a fun topic.
Yeah, just watch Disney movies.
Church tradition kind of backs us up in thinking that there's more to animals than just they're being here on earth. And I mean, there are just some things that Scripture doesn't address.
Yep, that is true. Okay, Brooke, what question did you want?
I have to choose a question.
Yep.
I told y'all I'm not good at choosing these questions. Like there's so many good ones, and there's one that I want to save for Kingdom Living. So we did have a question asked if we think that Christianity's evangelism has hurt more people than it's helped in the modern age. And if we agree with that, what do we think our approach to growing new disciples would be? And it's kind of been my life's work, actually. So, but I do think that especially in the Western world, in the United States, especially North America, that kind of those things that are evangelical practices have been very harmful. I think about televangelists and the Sunday morning shows where you had the screaming and the yelling and the fire and the brimstone. And again, I'll just go ahead and give you my email address before I even say this. It's brooke@grayumc.org. I think that fire and brimstone preaching is the absolute worst thing that can happen in a church, because anytime somebody's motivated out of fear, it's a temporary motivation. So, when you're condemning people to hell and sending them to hell and they decide to follow Jesus, I'm not sure that always sticks really well. So I think that's hurtful. And I'm divided on where things like knocking on your neighbor's door is helpful or harmful. Because I think people come to know Jesus because of other people. And I think sometimes we have left that, to quote the professionals, like let the preachers do it, let the preachers go out and get people in the church or get to know Jesus. So I think the way we go about doing it can be really harmful. What I will say is, in the last couple generations, this has really, really changed. People don't know how to have conversations about their relationship with Christ, and they don't know how to go about inviting people to church, and they feel like they're invading people's privacy if they even mentioned it. So I do think this idea of going door to door and forcing your way in and that kind of thing is harmful. I think the other thing that may be just as equally as harmful are all these stupid tracks that show up everywhere. Like, I don't want to see a track about Jesus on the toilet seat. Like, I just don't know of anybody that's going to know of Jesus because they've walked into a urinal and seen a track sitting up there. Like, so I have to say that, yes, I think some of our evangelism tactics have been very hurtful to the cause of people knowing Jesus, which is really what a disciple is someone who wants to follow Jesus, not just know Jesus.
I definitely no, I think you're dead on. Like the part you said about the learning through relationships, that reminded me like of the what was it Paul wrote to Timothy saying like, you continue what you believe because you know who you've learned it from, type thing. And that's like what convinced Paul knows that's what was convincing to Timothy. But I think my only disagreement is I don't think it's necessarily unique to the modern age. I think we've always kind of struggled side by side, the wheats and the tares, like with there's some people doing the right evangelization and there's some people doing wrong evangelization. Like you even look in the early church, there were people who wanted to be a lot more militant, the zealots, about the way they were spreading the gospel. You can think of a lot of things that have went wrong in mission trips throughout the ages. But I do think, we're always called to push back against that, and it's the wrong side of evangelization always comes in a different form. So the way we have to respond to it correctly is always a new evangelization type method too. Like I know in the Catholic Church, there's a push started with like John Paul II that's called like the new evangelization. That's talking about that, a new way to kind of approach telling people about Christ, and it's a pushback against exactly what you're talking about, that kind of pushy televangelist method of where that's a lot of people's first impression of Christianity, and that's not positive.
Yep. I really don't have anything else to say besides what you all are saying, so I'm just gonna give it to you.
And I think we sometimes, I think even bad efforts come from a good place, right? Like, and I think we have to remember that. I just think we have to evaluate what's effective and what's not effective. And I think too, when people are thinking about wanting to share their faith, the easiest thing in the world to do is say, hey, come to church with me, which is not a bad thing. So please don't email me and tell me it's a bad thing. But I think where you invite people to, so where's the first place that people invite them to is worship on Sunday mornings, right? Well, if you have no relationship with Jesus Christ, or you don't understand God to be a loving God, you don't worship them. Like, it would be a foreign concept to do that, right? So you go in and you're worshiping and you don't know when to sit down, stand up, shut up, talk, sing. It's really uncomfortable. And so when that's the first introduction you have to a church, it's like, I think I've told, it's like going on a first date and going to a movie and you don't really know anything about the person when you leave. You don't necessarily get to know what it means to follow Jesus by going to a worship service. So the funny thing is, in the Wesleyan movement, that you would never invite someone who is exploring the idea of being a Christian or just interested in it. You would never invite them to a worship service first. You kind of, I don't want to use the word earn your right to come to a worship service, but you kind of got to know people and you were invited into that worship service so that you weren't awkward. You didn't feel awkward. You didn't,
It's funny that you say that. I've never kind of put the reasoning behind it, but in traditional, Catholic catechism process, like catechumens, people who are coming into the church, the way that it had been handled for millennia was that they would come in and listen to the readings, and then the people who were coming in would leave and go off to their own thing to learn more about what they were worshiping. So they would skip the liturgy of the Eucharist, the actual, more worship part of it. But I think exactly what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I never had thought about it that way. I like where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big pushback right now against well, I don't know if everybody hears it, but this pushback about church being entertainment, right? That church is
Yeah.
entertainment. But if you're trying to attract people who know nothing about God and nothing about Jesus to your worship service, and you're trying to hook them so that they're stay interested to learn, if that's where you're doing your primary teaching about who Jesus is, then you're going to have all the bells and whistles and the flashing lights and the smoke screens and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, people. Like,
You're gonna have so many emails after this, Brooke.
I know, right? Like, I'm just racking them up. I can hear it ding, ding, ding. But I think you have to be mindful of that.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to another question. So that was 3 out of 5. So we've got 2 more. Any of these questions floating your boat here?
Oh, are we? Whose turn is it? Does it matter?
Anybody? So one that I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Nope. I'm not. Okay. Is there a healthy way to mix Christian and political beliefs, or should they remain separate? I feel like that's pretty relevant to our podcast in things that we've talked about. So how about that question?
I am going to come out and strongly say that they should not remain separate, because you don't put things that are important in your life into little bubbles. If you're, Christianity is such an important part of you, it should come out in other areas. Now, I'm not saying that means that translates to we should all form a theocracy and make it all only advocate for Christian laws to be political laws or something. But no, they shouldn't be put into little bubbles. Like even in America, the point of America is that a lot of the multiculturalism and stuff here is that we can live our life as a Christian. You can live your life as, whatever you want to, but you can do it publicly, and you don't have to put that in a little box and only open it up on Sundays. Like that should just come out, everywhere in your life.
Absolutely. I would add that.
Go ahead, Stacey.
I don't know why we're all interrupting each other tonight. It's weird. But I would add that in America, even though they shouldn't remain separate, sometimes to vote in a two-party system, you do have to prioritize. And you do have to almost ignore if you want to vote for one of the two candidates, because neither side is perfect in alignment with Christianity, and you're going to have to prioritize what your Christian beliefs are in regards to policy. And if you have the most important issue as your number one, then vote for that candidate. But that means you're probably going to be ignoring something else on the other side, and you can't get around that.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was going to say, is that I think the danger comes when we say that one political party represents the Christian faith and the other doesn't. Because if that's the case, then you're reading scripture through your political lens instead of looking at politics through your scriptural lens or your Christian lens.
Yes.
And if one political candidate is the Christian candidate, then you've confused some things, I think. And so I think that's what makes this conversation really difficult, because what I might prioritize might be different than what you prioritize. And so we could come from the same faith traditions and backgrounds and be faithful followers of Christ and put an emphasis on something different and cause us to look at the political system differently. I think of it in the same lens as shopping, or does your Christian faith influence who you do business with? And it's obvious that we're in a culture that does, because churches advertise where they're Christian businesses or not. Not everybody that's a Christian business does this, but but they'll put that out there. So I just was in a Facebook group for clergy women, and this became a pet peeve of mine. Somebody wanted to know who of us shopped with a particular online retailer. because they are of the opinion now that this online realtor is of Satan, and that we should all be ashamed if we, and I've seen and heard this done with other places too. So I mean, I think you have to let your faith help guide those decisions, but you have to make sure that you're not inventing things in the faith to cause you to go one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the influence is healthy when it's one way too. Like if my political, like you said, if I'm reading my political party into what my religious beliefs are, that's probably a problem.
Yeah, and for me, a huge turnoff is when any party, any candidate comes off as part of their campaign, they are the Christian candidate. They are calling themselves that.
Mhm.
Then I'm probably done. you know. So that's a big pet peeve of mine. I think a lot of the relevant information that we kind of touched on with Christian voting was in one of the episodes back in November with Nate. So go back and watch that. We talked a lot about this and talked a lot about the demographics that voted for Democrat and demographics that voted for Republican. So a lot of that is in that discussion. But yeah.
Yeah, and I do
memory. I
think
thought
there's
the same.
always, coming up on the political season, there's always this controversy of whether or not churches should be involved and what that means. And it's perfectly okay legally for churches to talk and have forums as long as they do it for both sides of an issue instead of just one issue. So legally they're able to do that. Most often churches don't want to do that. They want to pick whatever side of the coin, and we need to be careful about that, because it does then lead credence to this person being the Christian candidate, and that's a lot of weight to bear, for one thing.
But it does win a lot of votes.
It does,
unfortunately. Okay, well, that was my question, so y'all choose one. One more.
I was looking.
Let's do the Sunday of Sabbath. I think we had a couple people say they like that one too. Why do we Christians treat Sunday as a Sabbath when the historical Jewish Sabbath day is on Saturday? When did that change?
Well,
1954.
Well, I mean, I think I really started thinking about this one, and it's a roundabout, so stick with me, a roundabout way that I started really thinking about this and reading on it and studying it was why Sundays in Lent are considered feast days. Like, I was like, why do I get to skip my Lenten sacrifice on Sunday? Like, this doesn't make sense. And when we started worshiping as Christians on Sundays. Sundays are feast days because we're celebrating the rising of Christ. Every Sunday, as we gather to worship, we are celebrating the rising of Christ. And so I think that is when kind of the switch happened. Early on in Christianity, if you were a Jew that was following Christ, you still observed Sabbath on Saturday. There's a whole denomination that has been formed on this very thing. Your Seventh-day Adventists worship and gather for church school. They call it Saturday school on Saturday. But Christian churches normally gather on Sundays.
Yeah, a little more context too. We know from Revelation when John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, the Lord's Day being Sunday, because it's the day, like Brooke said, he rose from the dead. And 100% what you said, this was kind of one of those early church issues that a lot of people fell down on different sides. Like, there were a lot of debates about how Jewish the church should be, that we even read about some of it in the New Testament, with like how circumcision should fit in, what foods you can eat and stuff like that. And which day we should treat as Sabbath was one of those that the church was mostly pretty split on. And I know a lot of push actually came from a practical point of view once Christianity spread a lot more, that, you have this, what's now become the biggest religion in the Roman Empire, and half the people are off on Saturdays, half the people are off on Sundays. And the emperor at some point was like, this is ridiculous. We have 5 days that we can get something done. And he pushed the church a little bit. So like, maybe there's some influence there, but the church was the one that came together and made a decision that we're going to treat Sunday because otherwise it's getting a little out of hand here. But
Yeah, so I wonder if the controversy here, because it seems like at least some people think that this is a controversial thing, that it changed. I mean, I would argue that the Seventh Day Adventists probably believe that.
that's
So
pretty core. Yeah.
yeah. So is it because I guess the controversy around church authority versus biblical authority?
That's part of what I have heard people bring up. Like, did the church have the authority to do this? Yeah, and I think,
or is it really more just an anti-Catholic pushback? Like, do you think that goes into it at all?
Here's what I think: people get caught up on how everybody else is observing Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus tells us that that man was not created for Sabbath, but Sabbath was created for man. Yeah. I can tell you that as a pastor, there is nothing about a Sunday that is Sabbath for me.
You don't rest preaching and preparing for preaching?
Nothing. I mean, no, I'm so exhausted come Sunday night that it's crazy because of all the things that have to happen on a Sunday for everybody else to observe Sabbath. I mean, I think we get caught up in this, when really Sabbath is about resting our physical bodies as well as our spiritual side and our mental side, and just resting in God. And I think too, and this doesn't get talked about a lot, but we need to be reminded that the world doesn't revolve around us and that the world will not stop spinning if we stop for a little while. I mean, I tend to think that there are some of us in this world who think if I'm not constantly in motion doing something, then everything, and we put way too much importance on ourselves. I mean, it is a reminder that God is in control and it is not our responsibility to keep the world running.
So it goes back to the conversation that we've had recently, in that it's not the letter of the law, it's the principle. It's
my question would be this: I don't know anybody in this modern day and age, and I'm sure there are some people, so just go ahead and email me and tell me that you're one of them.
You want a lot of people to email you.
Yeah.
You have asked for it all night.
I'm just being silly because I know people get so bent out of shame about this stuff. I mean, we have lived in let me just put it this: we have lived in places that there's absolutely no way that we could have mowed our yard on Sunday because we would have heard about it the next week, but everybody in the neighborhood is allowed to mow their yard on Sunday. But the preacher can't, because that'd be breaking the Sabbath, So I guess what I'm saying is that I think this is one of the most hypocritical issues that we have in the church, and I've seen people teach on Sabbath and say, well, we're no longer going to cook on Sundays, then we're just going to go out and eat. Hello. You're making the people that you're at the restaurant work.
That's right.
Like,
that's right.
How is this not hypocritical? Like, so I don't know. So I have a big issue with Sabbath.
I'll just say I'm an advocate for treating the Saturday as a Sabbath and Sunday as the Lord's Day, and having 2 days of rest. I'm an advocate of that.
You want to go back to the first couple centuries where we had both days off.
That's right.
I agree. I'm for it.
That was a really good question. Okay, well that's our 5, and I think we have talked for quite a while. Do we want to maybe do a couple of honorable mentions and close?
Yeah, at least let Brooke get an honorable mention that way everybody.
Okay. Me? No, not me. I mean, I think there's a lot of these that we need to come back to and get, but I guess my honorable mention would be this: what book of the Bible do you struggle the most working through, and why? I don't know what the person meant by working through, if they just meant like reading it, or the one that causes more soul grief.
Yeah, I have multiple answers depending on how you interpret that too.
So I think the ones that probably have the most trouble reading, just because they bore the bejeebers out of me, would probably be Leviticus or Numbers. Like, I mean, that's where every good New Year's resolutions to read your Bible through dies. I mean, you hit those and they die. I think the hardest to read because it's convicting, maybe the book of James. And And I think the hardest book to read and like wrap your mind around what's really being said is the book of Hebrews. Now it's incredibly interesting, but I think sometimes it's hard to comprehend what's going on in Hebrews. So that's my answer to those.
Yeah, my answer was going to be the exact same, that Numbers, Leviticus, a lot of the Old Testament books just bore the life out of me. So
Sacred
that's when I
scripture
fail New
talking
Year's
about you
resolutions.
You can email him too, because he
Yeah.
just said there's
No,
nothing good in the
email
Old
Brooke.
Testament.
Just email
Scripture
Brooke.
bores
She'll
Justin is what you take
No.
from this podcast.
email Brooke and she'll get back to me. What about you, Bowen?
I'm kind
Do you
of
have an answer?
so I definitely thought that the Leviticus and Numbers were going to pop up, but I thought everything else was going to stick with the Old Testament type thing. But I definitely would say, I think the Daniels and Revelations with the apocalyptic literature can sometimes get a little difficult in how does this exactly apply, the exact details. Like, I think you can get the meta picture overall on what they're going for, but when you get like the exact verse and like, why did Daniel write it with this exact way or something like that, that can be tough. In terms of reading through too, though, and this one's going to sound weird because I love the Psalms. I absolutely love them. I struggle so much. It's like if I'm trying to do like one of the read straight through the Bibles, oh my gosh, the reading straight through the Psalms can just get so repetitive.
Yeah, yes. And
Yeah.
if you're not depressed before you read Psalms, sometimes
Yeah,
you're
good luck.
depressed while you're reading. I mean, there is, I agree with you.
They fit so much better when you like read one or two and then come back to them later or something like that. But trying to read them back to back is just, that's not really what they're meant for. And so I don't know why I do that, but a lot of plans put them that way. So I tried, and it's hard.
Yep. That was a
I
good
tell
question.
you, my favorite Bible study I've ever done is by Beth Moore, and it's the
Beth
story of David. And it was the very first Bible study I probably did, like really in-depth kind of Bible study. And you read the Psalms as you read what's going on in David's life, and so you really get a feel for like cool. It's a heart like his, and just absolutely love it. I mean, all these years later, I probably did it 30 years ago, and I still think about that. And it was the first time that I really thought about, man, there was somebody going through some kind of trial, while writing this. So
Awesome. Okay, so I guess the last question that I want to bring up, and at the start of the show,
dishonorable mention.
The start of the show, we kind of indicated this was a bad question or dishonorable mention. That's probably not fair. Any question is good. So submit any question.
Right.
It's just this was the most not relevant and not what we were thinking of to answer. But the question is, when will you start selling ads on the podcast? And the answer is, haven't really thought about it. And I don't know when or if that's going to happen. My fear is when we open it up, and this is for local ads. This is not like YouTube, adding ads to our videos or whatever, because that could happen at some point. And when it does, YouTube does its thing, right? But this is local ads. And my fear is when we open that window, then we could end up in a situation where all we're doing is talking about, sponsors or filling up our screen with ads of all the different places that we're familiar with that might listen to the podcast. So while that would be beneficial to us in terms of money, I guess revenue, I don't know that I want the podcast to kind of do that. What I will say that when we have a guest who has something that they might need to advertise, then go ahead and do it. Like I don't mind that at all. And if we're ever in a discussion where we're talking about, I don't know, Pat's Diner, and I'm bringing it up right now, so here is the ad.
This is
Pat's Diner.
I know, right?
That's what I had.
If you're in
delicious
Sevierville, go
food.
bank at Tennessee State Bank.
That's right. So Pat's Diner, that's what I had for dinner today, and I had chopped steak, and it was amazing.
It is amazing.
But check it out if you're ever in Lebanon, Pat's Diner. Just when we're naturally talking about things, that will be the plug for those businesses. But I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where we are literally accepting money to advertise businesses.
Do
I'm
you
not
know why this makes me really happy?
Why?
Because you can't bring us some silly skit that Bowling and I have to do as a commercial.
As a commercial?
I mean, you're just saying.
You're
you're
going to change my mind on this.
It's in
You're going to change my
stone,
mind on
right?
this.
Like,
Now, yeah, I would say that it's not in stone. Like, it could change, and we like, if the desire's there enough, we could decide, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. But I fear that we're going to have, okay, if one business gets it, then maybe, all Lebanon businesses, for my hometown anyway, are going to want it. So then all we're going to do is spend time doing advertisements and or talking about
no, you're
sponsors.
wrong. You just raise the money. Supply and demand, dude.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to be pushing so many ads now. It's going to be.
I know. I mean, I've got a kid. I got to finish through college.
Yeah. So we haven't thought a lot about it, to the person that asked this. But if you're a guest on our podcast, again, at the hint who it was, you know who you are. Then you can advertise whatever you need to advertise.
Within reason.
Within reason, yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah. All right. So I guess that will conclude our top 5 with honorable mentions and dishonorable mentions. So that was pretty good. Like, there was a lot of
that's fun. Yeah, if y'all like it, I'd love to do this again. This was fun.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We definitely need to make a point to do, the fan question top 5s periodically. Now, we do have more questions we didn't get to. Some of the questions are going to be better fulfilled either in Kingdom Living or Topic. So that's what we're going to do. So thank you very much for all of the questions and all the topics that you have gave us. That's exactly the feedback we want. And just keep sending it to us. Whenever you think of either a top 5 or a topic, or just have a question you want us to answer on the podcast, send it to us, and we will do our best to do that.
What's our email?
AppalachianLiturgy@gmail.com. That is our email. And you can obviously just message us directly on any of the social medias. So, okay. Well, this was a lot of fun. So peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.